When we talk about size, one of the first things that always comes up is the idea of what women actually want. The truth is, most men carry around a level of anxiety that is shaped more by movies, media, and cultural myths than by science. As a urologist, I can tell you that when researchers have studied this question in depth, the findings are much more reassuring than people expect. In fact, when we look at scientific surveys, women consistently prefer sizes that are very close to the actual global averages. That means the majority of men are already within the range that women consider attractive and satisfying. One of the most cited studies on this topic was done at UCLA, where women were presented with 3D printed models of penises ranging from smaller than average to much larger than average. These models allowed participants to browse, physically choose what they felt was most appealing, both for long-term partners and for one-time encounters. What researchers found is that the average ideal erect size chosen was about 5 to 6 inches in length with a girth of about 5 to 5 inches. That's not the gesto. Exaggerated sizes we see glamorized in adult films. Instead, it reflects something much more realistic and attainable for most men. What's particularly interesting is how consistent these results are across different studies and populations. A large-scale review published in the British Journal of Urology International looked at measurements across tens of thousands of men worldwide. They found the average erect length is about 16 inches, and the average girth is about 459 inches. So when you line up the average preference of women against the actual average size of men, you see that they overlap almost perfectly. That means most men are already right where they need to be. The fear that you have what science really says. To be significantly larger, to be considered desirable is simply not supported by science. Another point worth highlighting is how preference can change depending on the context. Women in these studies tended to choose slightly larger sizes when asked about casual one-time encounters. This is likely influenced by novelty, curiosity, or even the cultural idea of what's considered exciting. But when the present time six of question shifted to long-term partners, someone they would see every day, share intimacy with regularly, and build a relationship with preferences shifted closer to the actual average size. That tells us that for real relationships, size isn't the driving factor. Instead, comfort, compatibility, and overall satisfaction matter more. This is so important to understand because it helps us see the disconnect between perception and reality. So many men are influenced by adult entertainment, where performers are specifically selected for being larger than average. When that becomes the standard of comparison, the average a man is left feeling inadequate, even though in reality he is exactly in the range that most women find ideal. It creates a cycle of unnecessary insecurity and pressure, when the truth is that the majority of men are perfectly equipped for a fulfilling sex life. It's also worth talking about how women themselves describe their experiences. Many women report that they care less about the exact number of inches and more about how their partner makes them feel during intimacy. Being attentive, understanding their partner's body, and knowing how to create arousal through touch and connection all rank higher in importance. Size might initially grab attention in a purely visual sense, but long-term satisfaction is rooted in so much more than that. There's another share there to this conversation, which is female anatomy. The vagina is not an endless tunnel where more length equals more pleasure. Anatomically, the most sensitive areas are concentrated in the first 2 to 3 inches. This includes the external clitoris, the clitoral, legs that extend internally, and the G-spot region. These are all accessible without needing extreme length. What this tells us is that size beyond a certain point doesn't necessarily add pleasure. It can sometimes even cause discomfort. So, while men worry about not being large enough, the reality is that being too large can create all challenges of its own. The bottom line is that science consistently reassures us. Women's preferences are for sizes, very close to average, and that's where most men already fall. The pressure to measure up to unrealistic standards is a cultural invention, not a biological or psychological reality. What matters more than size is confidence, communication, and the ability to make your partner feel cared for and connected. When men internalize this reality, they can move past insecurity and focus on the WW. Average size versus women's preferences, the qualities that truly create intimacy. So, if you've ever doubted yourself because of size, I want you to take away in this message. You're likely already in the range that women actually want. The studies show it. The anatomy supports it. And you treat your failure as a well L. You give up. Instead of worrying about inches, shift that energy toward building emotional intimacy, understanding your partner's needs, and showing up with confidence. That is what leads to real satisfaction for both partners. When people think about sexual satisfaction, they often focus heavily on physical attributes, especially size. But when we actually look at the science and listen to what women report about their experiences, it becomes clear that the most powerful driver of intimacy is not about inches at all. It's about the quality of the connection, the emotional bond, and how the partners communicate with one another. Size may come up in conversations or be emphasized in the media, but it is rarely what makes intimacy deeply fulfilling. One of the most consistent findings in research is that sexual satisfaction is multidimensional. It involves the physical, emotional, psychological, and relational aspects of a partnership. For many women, feeling emotionally connected to their partner is the foundation that allows them to experience pleasure more fully. When there's trust, when they feel safe and cared for, they can relax and be present in the moment. That sense of emotional intimacy creates a much stronger impact on pleasure than a specific measurement ever could. Studies have shown that women report higher satisfaction in relationships where communication is open and honest. Being able to express what feels good, what doesn't, and what they desire without fear of judgment significantly increases pleasure. This highlights an important truth. Sexual satisfaction is less about anatomy and more about communication skills. A partner who listens, responds, and adapts is often seen as far more satisfying than one who assumes that size alone is what matters. It's also worth remembering that women's bodies are complex and their arousal patterns differ from men's. Female sexual response is not always linear. For many women, mental and emotional stimulation play as big a role as physical touch. A thoughtful partner who takes time to long-term versus short-term partner choices. Build anticipation, who engages in foreplay and who is attentive to cues, can create an experience that is exponentially more pleasurable than relying on size alone. Science tells us that for most women, arousal is a whole body experience, not something confined to one anatomical measurement. Let's also consider the role of technique. A partner who understands anatomy, how the clitoris, the G-spot, and other erogenous zones respond, is more likely to provide consistent pleasure. Research shows that only about 20 to 30% of women orgasm from penetration alone. The majority require clitoral stimulation, either directly or indirectly, to reach climax. That means that a larger size on its own is unlikely to provide the type of stimulation that results in orgasm. What does make the difference is the partner's awareness, creativity, and willingness to learn what works best for their partner's unique body. Emotional, intimacy, and physical technique are deeply connected. When a partner feels understood and cared for, they are more likely to communicate openly about what they want. That communication, in turn, helps the other partner become more skilled at creating pleasure. This feedback loop reinforces trust, satisfaction, and connection. Compare that with a situation where the focus is only on size. If someone assumes that bigger means better, they may neglect the essential ingredients of process, communication, and attentiveness. Over time, that can actually reduce satisfaction rather than enhance it. Another important factor is confidence. Confidence doesn't come from measurements. It comes from how you carry yourself, how you treat your partner, and how you approach intimacy. Women consistently report that confidence is attractive, but confidence isn't the same as arrogance. True, confidence is being comfortable with who you are and being able to focus on your partner instead of worrying about yourself. When a man feels secure in his body, he's more likely to engage fully, listen carefully, and be playful and experimental. All qualities that make intimacy richer and more satisfying. It's also crucial to address the emotional impact of anatomy explained, what really matters, focusing too much on size. When men internalize the idea that size is the only factor that matters, it can create anxiety, performance pressure, and self-doubt. This mental burden can interfere with arousal, lead to erectile difficulties, and ultimately harm the relationship. On the other hand, when the focus shifts to building connection, exploring new ways of pleasure, and communicating openly, intimacy becomes more relaxed and enjoyable. That change benefits both partners equally. The science here is really clear. Long-term satisfaction in relationships is not predicted by size, but by emotional closeness and quality of communication. Couples who feel connected, who laugh together, who build trust, and who engage in open conversations about intimacy report higher levels of sexual satisfaction. These findings remind us that intimacy is holistic. It is not about one variable, but about the dynamic interaction of body, mind, and emotions. So if you're worried about whether you're enough, the most valuable shift you can make is to focus on connection instead of comparison. Ask questions, pay attention, and create an environment where your partner feels safe and desired. Explore together, experiment without judgment. And remember that satisfaction is not measured in inches, but in moments of genuine closeness at the end of the day. What women truly want is not just a partner with a dollar ball, certain size. It's a partner who listens, who cares, and who knows how to turn intimacy into a shared experience of pleasure. Science consistently shows us that communication, emotional intimacy, and attentiveness are the real keys to satisfaction. When those are present, the question of size fades into the background because what really matters is not how many inches you bring, but how deeply you connect. When we talk about pleasure and anatomy, one of the biggest misconceptions that men have is that women need or even want in very large sizes to feel satisfied. This an idea is reinforced constantly by pornography, popular culture, and myths passed around in conversations. But when we look at the female body through the lens of medical science, the reality is very different. Female anatomy is not designed in a way that requires excessive length. In fact, most of the areas that are responsible for sexual pleasure are located right at the entrance of the vagina within the first 2 to 3 inches. This means that for the vast majority of women, larger size is not only unnecessary, but in some cases, it can actually be uncomfortable. Let's start with a quick look at anatomy. The vagina is a muscular canal that has the ability to stretch and accommodate, but the nerve density is not evenly. Y connection beats inches, distributed throughout. The highest concentration of nerve endings and, therefore, the greatest sensitivity is found in the external clitoris, the clitoral hood, and the internal structures of the clitoris that extend along the vaginal walls. These structures are located right near the ravel, vaginal opening. The G-spot, which some women find highly pleasurable, is also situated only about 2 inches inside the prosoplast, a vaginal canal along the front wall. When you think about it this way, it becomes clear that the areas that contribute most to arousal and orgasm are all located close to the entrance, not deep inside. Now, what happens when penetration goes far beyond this area? For some women, deeper penetration can be pleasurable, especially if it provides pressure against certain areas, like the cervix or the anterior thorax. But for many others, this can actually create discomfort or even pain. The cervix is not highly sensitive in a pleasurable way. Instead, it can cause a dull ache when hit repeatedly or forcefully. This means that for many women, excessive length is not just unnecessary, but can actually interfere with enjoyment. So, while men may be worrying about not being long enough, the reality is that being too long can sometimes create the opposite problem. Studies back this up. Research consistently shows that the majority of women do not orgasm from penetration alone. Around 70 to 80% of women require clitoral stimulation to reach orgasm. This means that penetration, regardless of size, is often not enough to create climax on its own. What this tells us is that pleasure is not determined by how far someone can reach, but by how well a partner understands and stimulates the areas that are truly sensitive. For example, focusing on the clitoris using hands or oral stimulation and combining these with penetration often provides a much higher chance of orgasm than penetration alone. It's also important to talk about the adaptability of the vagina. Because it is a muscular organ, it has the ability to expand and contract. It can accommodate a range of sizes, but it also naturally contracts back to its resting state. This is why women can give birth to a baby and still deferent, building confidence in the bedroom, be able to enjoy sexual intimacy later on. The vagina is resilient and versatile, but that does not mean that bigger automatically translates to better. The goal is not to stretch the vagina as far as possible, but to